So now that we've talked about the way that results can be combined, and we talked about some of the differences between collect and reduce, let's now see some of the traps and pitfalls that can occur when you use parallel streams and reduce and don't remember that reduce requires or expects immutable behaviors. So we're going to take a look at a fun example that will illustrate how all this works. So always remember the difference between collect and reduce. One way to remind yourself of this is to, even if you don't plan on using parallel streams, you might want to run your code with a parallel stream to test to make sure you get sensible results. And you'll see how this works out when we look at the test case here in a second. So here's an example. We're going to look at in more detail at this example shortly that is buggy. Why is it buggy? Well, it's buggy because we're going to start out by getting a stream of strings from a parameter that's passed in. And that doesn't do anything yet because everything's lazy. Then we're going to go ahead and check the parallel parameter. If it's true, then we're going to turn this into a parallel stream. So far, so good. But then remember when you have the parallel call here that whatever occurs last wins. So we set it to parallel when it's parallel parameter. And so that means this is going to run as a parallel stream. So if parallel is set to false, this code works just fine. And that's because there's only one thread, we're making ourselves one string builder, and then we're appending the results to a new reduced string of words as a result of reduce calling. Everything is fine in that case. However, if parallel is true, then chaos and insanity are going to ensue, and that's because we have only one instance of string builder here, but then we're going to be concurrently appending things to it. And that is going to cause a lot of problems. So we're going to see how that works. And the problem here is there's race conditions since string builder is not thread safe, and moreover, we're making too many copies of this stuff. So there's a couple different ways to solve this. One way to solve this problem is to use reduce with string concatenation. The problem over here was that string builder is not an immutable object. It's one object that's mutable, and we're mutating it, which is bad. You could replace the use of string builder with this, where you make yourself a new string, and you could actually just use an empty string, literal. And then what we're going to do here is concatenate two strings together. That will work because string concatenation is immutable. You get an immutable string. However, you end up with lots of overhead from having to copy the strings all over the place, which is not good. So another solution, which is probably better for this type of use case, is to use collect with the so-called joining collector. And so what happens here is that when we do collect, this works properly in a parallel stream because the semantics allow mutable result containers, not immutable containers or immutable objects. And the joining collector will just basically concatenate things together very efficiently without requiring you to do any locking, without you having to worry about race conditions or other hazards. So that's basically the thing to think about here. So there's some other stuff to remember. There's issues having to do with associativity and identity with reduce. And bottom line here is that subtraction is not associative. So if you run this in parallel, you'll get strange results because it's going to do the subtractions in different orders. And since subtraction is not associative, it matters. So you'll get the wrong answer. Conversely, if you sum things up and you pass in the wrong identity operation, then you're going to get incorrect results. So for example, if identity is not 0, 0 is the identity value for addition, because the identity of addition is defined as the identity, which would be 0, with a plus of a value yields the value, and the inverse. So if you pass in, say, 1, we're going to get the wrong result. And the same thing occurs with product as well. So you have to be careful with the identity values. So here's the product one. Again, if this is not 1, then you're in big trouble because that's not the identity value. There's lots more discussions about this that occur in this particular video. So I recommend you take a look at that. And we're also going to walk through an example here in just a second so you can see how it all works. So that's the end of this discussion.